Hello everyone, this is Mike Manley, and I thought I would show the process of adapting the script of The Phantom into a couple of dailies. And I will start by reading the script, and then I usually try and review what kind of reference I might need. Often it involves looking at old strips, and in this case, it involved looking back at some strips done from a few years ago, back when both Terry Beatty and Paul Ryan, who was the previous artist, both were previous artists on the strip. And so once I review and get my reference, I have a little brainstorm session where I try to basically imagine in my mind, like a movie director, like how am I going to set up my shots. And my shots, the way I set up my shots were the panels, the angles on the panels, have a lot to do, or everything to do with what I need to show. And so the first brainstorming is thinking about where I need to place my camera. And I place my camera where the story would be, the angle would be the most effective. So starting with this first strip, it's a character sitting on a bunk inside of a prison. The second panel makes her look up at the door. She hears a sound. And then the third panel, she is sitting, or she's at the door, probably looking out of the bars, trying to see who is or what is making the sound that she hears. Now, I'm not going to reveal to you who the character is, although some of you Phantom fans might be able to figure that out. But we also don't want to reveal it to the reader. So there's a couple of ways you could do that. You can since she's inside of a prison, you can make it all creepy and dark, and you can use lighting to help do that, which is something that I figured I would do. And also the angle at which you show the face. So you can show a character in profile, mostly in shadow or in rim lighting. And rim lighting being, let's say if you had a little face, the rim light might come, the light would come in, and then most of the face would be in shadow. That would obscure the identity. So the whole idea is to show this character hearing a sound, getting up and looking, but we don't want to reveal who she is. So another thing that I do is I would gather reference of a prison, things like that, which I already have. And so the first thing I do is I block in where the lettering, and in this case there's going to be a caption here. So I've gotten pretty good at being able to guess that. And so now I know I have the rest of this, and I'm breaking it down into three panels. And I use a red color erase to rough everything in, because I like the way that looks, even better than the blue. The other thing that's different now, I can actually show you, I can show you a strip that I did last week. Okay, so I roughed it all in red, then do the cleanup in with a mechanical pencil. I really like these Graphire, Graph Gear. They're Pentels. Very nice. Real nice. Good mechanical pencil. I generally tend to like an HB to B lead. Not too soft, but fairly dark. So this is what I did last week. Same thing. I went through, roughed it all out. Then I go through and clean it up. I'm very much like a baker. I have a recipe that I follow, a procedure, a way of working that I follow very, very consistently, because one of the things about doing a comic strip, and in fact I do two of them, I do The Phantom and I do Judge Parker, I have to be able to produce consistently. And so this way I work, going through figuring out what I want to do, getting my reference, roughing it out, cleaning it up. And in this case now, because of the pandemic, I'm inking this digitally because I send this to my assistant, Liang, and she inks the backgrounds. And we work in Clip Studio Paint. She inks the backgrounds, and then I go in and ink the figures, and I combine the layers later. We're doing that because she used to come over and work in the studio, but because of the pandemic, everybody's working at home. So this is a very deliberate and consistent way of working, which allows me to produce 14 comic strips every week, because I have to do the 6 of the Phantom and the 7 of Judge Parker. The difference is I do the Judge Parker strips all digital, so there are no more pencils. I pencil right in Clip Studio and ink right in Clip Studio. In the past, for 8 years, almost 10 years, I did the strip traditionally, just like the Phantom. And I have a huge stack of originals, so I decided to not continue to do that just because of space. I also am able to sell the Phantom strips, and there really isn't much of a market for doing selling the Judge Parker strips. So this is the way that I'm working right now. Once this damn pandemic is over and we go back to the way it used to be, I'll be going back and doing my strips traditionally like I used to. But for right now, digital is the way to go. So the next step is to figure out, in my mind's eye, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have, I always have to think of the space the characters that are in. And one of the things I like to think about is what I call the plus signs. If you take two, there's a plus and a negative. All right, if I have a little, then I have a horizon line, right? And that gives you a much more dynamic space, right? You know, usually you would have a much more, to make the space not so distorted. The vanishing points on the horizon line are well outside the composition. And that gives you a much more normal sense of space. But a lot of times, when I'm working fast and I'm working in comics, I sort of freelance it, because I kind of know from experience that if I do this and I grid my space, hoping this shows up, Okay, and then I'll have one going this way. Now again, I'm judging this by eye and from experience. I always suggest people who are starting out really work out your perspective. So now I know I'm going to have this person, I'm going to have maybe the cell doors here. There'll be a cot here, a chain holding the cot. And so I'm going to show this person from the back. Get her body on the bed. Like she's reacting. She's going to be reacting. She's kind of like depressed sitting here on her bed. And so we won't see her head, her face rather, because she's, we're hiding the face so you won't be able to see her identity. And get her. Again, you want a nice gesture. Since this is mostly a silhouette, you want the gesture to tell you something about the person and their attitude. Is she sad? And you can keep it very loose. I keep it very loose and very sculptural here, trying to get the shapes and the feeling that I want. That's what's most important. And you need to have her head underneath her hair so you can help get the shape of the hair right. And the scapula. Tilt of her hips. And people think, oh, you don't erase, but I erase quite a bit. Erasing is actually part of drawing. So when you say, oh, it's a mistake to erase, no, it's a mistake not to erase. Erasing, you lighten things up. It allows you to be able to refine things. Draw like a sculptor. Try to feel a shape. Elbow. Her hair would come down off the top of her head, hanging down. So maybe we actually won't see her face, but we still need to know where that head is in order to get. And then she's wearing some kind of, dirty prison clothes. To bed, the pillows, covers. I find it's very important, even when something gets cut off, is to draw it. So I'm going to draw her, put her hand in there, even if I'm cutting it off. Okay. Always use triangles to make your lines. You may ink them or even pencil them freehand. But a lot of people in the beginning make the mistake of not using the triangle, and their draftsmanship immediately starts to disappear. Starts to get, everything gets warbly. And I find that that is not a good, that's not good. So there's the other end. Door. Frame. Now, looking at my guidelines, and I'll have a, this will all be a cast shadow. So right away I start thinking, in my mind I'm trying to think like, how do I want this to be lit? So maybe this whole part of her body will be in shadow. So you just got to take your time on certain things like drawing windows and buildings and mechanical things to make them believable. And then I'm thinking, in this panel I want her looking. The line kind of leads your eye right to just kind of frame that head. Again, this is very light now. And it's okay to work very light. Now I want a shot outside the cell. So she's going to be in the cell, but we can't see. We don't want to see who she is, so we're only going to see little bits of her. So I find when you're drawing somebody inside, like behind bars or something, it's actually better to rough in the person. So I'm just trying to get this spacing, because this is going to be really important in keeping her face hidden, or the identity. So if I draw this little grid, roughen this little grid, that allows me Okay. I want the shadow going in to the cell. So just very lightly shade over that, just to sort of remind me of where the lighting is coming. And that'll be the end of the cell. And the track. You have to sort of plan ahead when you're drawing something like this. It's pretty layered or complicated. So now we have the three roughed out. The three panels roughed out. I guess they don't get to have a lot of hair products in prison. The other thing is, if I was penciling this for someone else to completely ink, then I would probably pencil super, super tight. But I try to pencil just tight enough for me to be able to ink, or for Liang to be able to ink the backgrounds. most folds are all triangles, and you just want to try to get them to interlock, to sort of a nice zigzag. Now, because I drafted this out, and this is a crumbly old prison, I can draw this part very freehand, and it'll still be in perspective, even though I can draw that. You only need a little bit of the chain that's holding up her bed. So now I've got the covers on the bed, got the nasty pillow, prison pillow. Then I can go right over here and do the same thing. And it's fun to, I think, to draw busted up old brick walls, and I love doing backgrounds. I think the backgrounds are very important. They can be just as important as the character. It really helps set the mood. So where would Batman be if you set him in Cleveland and he didn't have the Batcave? Be pretty boring. So even when you're drawing fantasy, especially when you're drawing fantasy, I should say, it's very important for the backgrounds to be believable. So again, I've been thinking all along about how this whole scene is going to be lit. It's going to be mostly in shadow. Okay. And then, if I decide that the light is coming here like so, then if I want later, I could actually put the cast light, which you would really see from the bars, and you could so I'm thinking all these bars will be silhouetted because it just reads better graphically. The other thing I'm always taking into consideration is that even though I am drawing these two strips on an 14 by 17, so they're fairly large, but the actual strip in the paper may be about as big as this panel, if I'm lucky. Sometimes they're actually even smaller. Every paper is different. Some papers try to squeeze them down so incredibly small. So I'm always taking into account that what I'm drawing has to look good, small. That is the default for my consideration of how something looks. How, if something is working, if it looks good, small. If it reduces poorly, then my job as a storyteller is not going to be very clear. So I just want to make sure. Here we go. So her face. Just want a little bit of that face in there. Again, that's something that you really might not see very well. Okay. Then usually, now for myself, I wouldn't really go much beyond this point in order for me to ink it. But for the video, for purposes of instruction, what I would do is I would go in, or if I was penciling this for somebody else, it would probably be even tighter. Everybody likes tight pencils. I would go in and fill this all in. And as I discussed on the podcast, for how you light the hair, think of this as a ball with a volume, and you would have a call like the crown line. We would see hair usually has, you would have a little light coming in, so it would get darker and lighter, and then you would go down like a wave, and then higher. So wherever you go over that peak, you would get a little bit of a highlight, but not too much. So again, to make sure that the shadows and everything fall right where you want, you need to take your time. A lot of people are worried about speed, but speed comes from practice and confidence. So again, even though I'm going to fill this all in black, I want it to be in there. I have to know that the form works. I find that sometimes just going in with the side of the pencil is the best way. Now, I know that those are going to be black, so solid black, so I can just put X for black. But one of the other things I like to do with a shadow or dark places is to add textures so that it's not completely dead. And I always loved the way Alfredo Alcala, I believe is his name. A lot of the Filipino artists would go in and they would add texture to a black. A lot of the Spanish and the Italian artists would do the same thing. So I do this and pencil this texture in so that my assistant will know that that's what I want. So it just helps liven up. I am a big fan of the old pen and ink artists like especially Franklin Booth. He's a huge favorite of mine, and he was very influential on a lot of the artists like Bernie Wrightson and the artists from the Philippines who had a very wonderful, beautiful textural quality to their inks. So I just find that doing this will make the wall look a lot more cool and interesting. And again, if I was inking this myself, I would just do this all when I inked it. But since I'm having my assistant ink the backgrounds, and in fact, if we were still working in the same room, she would be drawing these back. I would lay it out, and then she would pencil the backgrounds in. So she would be doing This part, not me. But just for the just to show how this will look. And again, this is what I recommend people do in the beginning. When you're first starting out, you might not be able to visualize this. So part of penciling and inking, part of this job is you have to produce a lot of work. So when you go from one stage, from penciling to inking, you don't want to have any real questions in the inking stage. You don't want to go like, well, should that be black or that should be white? You should figure that out at this point. That way you'll know. So when I was younger, especially when I was younger, I penciled everything very finished because I wanted to be able to know when I went from inking to penciling if I had made the right choices. So again, I'm always saying this is working comics, I always say, is sort of like baking brownies. There's a real recipe to some of the process that by nature works in your favor because you have to produce a high volume of work, especially if you're doing something like a comic strip. You really don't have time to try something, find out that it doesn't work, and then have to redo it. You can have plenty of time to do that as a student, but once you become a professional, you really have to be able to produce the work. So there's the first panel. I can and the shadows move, they distort. Now, one of the fun things about comics is you can really kind of play and exaggerate and push things. That's where your style can kind of come in. So as a shadow would go further away, it would sort of start to distort. You see this by looking at a lot of old classic Hollywood movies, especially stuff in film noir. You really see how they played around with the lighting. So now that's a pretty interesting panel. You get this sad sort of sulking figure. Tells the story. Person's in prison on their cot. And again, you know, with comic strips, you have to have a lot of economy. You have very little space. You have very little space to tell your story. You know, I got my narration in there. I got more narration, and I got my other roughed in there. So there you go. I'll post a finished version of this pencil, of this strip. I may even take another little short video of me penciling this other thing here, but I'm going to stop it right here. And thank you very much for watching. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Thanks. Bye.